Surviving the Costa estate meant adhering to a single unspoken rule: avoid eye contact with the boss, and never even dare to breathe in the direction of his fiancée. Wrapped in designer silk, Claudia was a loaded gun. The housekeeping staff turned over on a weekly basis, quitting in tears, or worse, simply vanishing. Then Harper arrived. Neither a saint nor a woman in search of a savior, she was only there for the exorbitant hazard pay. Yet, the moment Harper stared down the future Mrs. Costa and refused to flinch, a fracture cracked through the entire hierarchy of the city's underworld. The Costa estate didn't look like a mob boss's fortress. It looked like a modern art museum perched on the edge of a cliff in upstate New York. Wall-to-wall glass, polished concrete, and stark white marble. It was a house designed to show you that there was nowhere to hide. Harper's knees ached. She was scrubbing a microscopic scuff mark off the baseboards in the grand foyer, using a toothbrush and diluted bleach. The air in the house was permanently set to a crisp 68 degrees. It kept the staff awake and the residents preserved. Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, stood 5 feet away, her posture rigid as a board. She wore a heavy wool cardigan despite the season. Mrs. Gable had survived in this house for 5 years, a tenure unheard of in their line of work. She survived by being invisible. "She's coming down," Mrs. Gable said. Her voice didn't rise above a whisper, but the sheer panic in it made Harper pause her scrubbing. "Keep your head down. Do not speak unless you are spoken to. If she asks you to do something impossible, you say, 'Yes, Miss Claudia,' and you figure it out." Harper nodded, dunking the toothbrush back into the bucket. She was 26, burdened by $70,000 of medical debt left behind by a mother who had the audacity to die anyway. She had worked in dive bars, overnight diners, and corporate cleaning gigs where executives threw staplers at the wall. She thought she understood terrible people. She thought wealth was just loud and obnoxious. Then she heard the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, the sharp click of stilettos on marble echoing through the cavernous space. Claudia descended the floating glass staircase. She was striking, yes, but not in a way that invited you in. She was beautiful in the way a scalpel was beautiful, sharp, cold, clinical. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She wore a tailored crimson suit that probably cost more than Harper's entire debt. Harper kept her head angled down, focusing on the rhythmic circles of her brush against the baseboard. Claudia reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. The silence in the room became absolute. The faint hum of the central air conditioning sounded like a jet engine. "Mrs. Gable!" Claudia's voice was a soft, melodic purr that somehow carried a razor-wire edge. "Yes, Miss Claudia," the older woman replied instantly. "There is dust on the underside of the leaves of the ficus in the West Solarium. I noticed it yesterday. I notice it today. I will have it handled immediately, Miss Claudia." "No, you won't." Claudia turned her gaze. Harper felt the weight of it, like a physical pressure on the back of her neck. "The new girl will do it. What is your name?" Harper stopped scrubbing. She placed the brush on the rim of the bucket, dried her hands on her apron, and stood up. She didn't snap to attention like Mrs. Gable. She just stood, keeping her shoulders relaxed. "Harper." Claudia's eyes narrowed slightly, a microscopic shift in the flawless architecture of her face. "Harper, no title, no miss, just Harper." She kept her voice flat, neutral. She wasn't giving this woman fear, and she wasn't giving her defiance. She was giving her nothing, a blank wall. Claudia walked toward her. She invaded Harper's personal space, the scent of expensive jasmine and cold copper rolling off her. Claudia lifted a hand, a massive diamond catching the morning light, and trailed a manicured fingernail along the collar of Harper's uniform. Clean the ficus leaves, Harper, with a damp cloth, then polish them with mayonnaise. If a single leaf tears, you are fired. If I see a speck of dust, you are fired. Do you understand? Yes. Yes, Miss Claudia. Harper looked at her, really looked at her. She saw the tension in Claudia's jaw, the desperate, constant need to control her environment. It was exhausting just to witness. Yes, Miss Claudia, Harper said. Claudia held her gaze for 3 seconds longer, waiting for a twitch, a swallow, a shift of the eyes. Harper gave her nothing. Claudia finally scoffed, turning on her heel and walking toward the dining room. You're an idiot, Mrs. Gable hissed the second Claudia was out of earshot. You do not look at her, you submit. I'm here to clean, Mrs. Gable, Harper said, picking up her bucket. I'm not here to worship. She spent the next 3 hours in the West Solarium, wiping down individual plant leaves. It was mindless, degrading work designed to break the spirit. But Harper's spirit had been broken and glued back together with cheaper, tougher materials a long time ago. She turned it into a meditation. She survived the shift, but she knew Claudia had marked her. The game had started, and Harper was playing whether she wanted to or not. Damien Costa didn't enter a room. The room simply rearranged itself around him. Harper felt the atmospheric shift before she saw him. It was Thursday evening, 2 weeks into her employment. The house, usually a tomb of anxious silence, suddenly vibrated with a low-frequency tension. 4 men in dark suits stepped into the foyer first, sweeping the perimeter. Then came Damien. He was a man constructed of broad shoulders and quiet violence. He didn't strut. He moved with a heavy, grounded efficiency. He wore his bespoke suits like armor. Harper, holding a tray of polished silver in the adjoining hallway, caught a glimpse of him as he handed his coat to a trembling butler. His eyes were dark, unreadable, scanning the space out of deeply ingrained paranoia. He didn't look at the staff. They were furniture. That night, Damien and Claudia hosted a dinner. It wasn't a social gathering. It was a board meeting with better wine and higher stakes. 5 men sat at the long mahogany table, eating seared scallops in near silence. Harper was assigned to pour the wine. Mrs. Gable had given her a terrified, fervent pep talk in the pantry beforehand. Keep the label facing out. Do not touch the rim to the glass. Do not breathe heavily. Harper moved around the table like a ghost. She heard snippets of conversation. They weren't talking about murders in dark alleys. They were talking about offshore accounts, city zoning permits, and union leadership. It was corporate, sanitized evil. She approached Claudia's chair. Claudia was speaking to a heavy-set man across the table, her tone dripping with polite condescension. The waterfront properties are non-negotiable, Arthur, Claudia said, tapping a silver fork against the table. You will surrender the lease by Friday, or I will have your assets frozen, and then I will have your son's tuition at Georgetown quietly refunded. Arthur turned a pale, sickly gray. Harper stepped in to pour Claudia's wine, a bold, heavy red. Just as Harper tilted the bottle, Arthur slammed his fist on the table. You can't do this, Damien, he barked, looking past Claudia to the head of the table. I built that dock. You promised me. The sudden violent motion shook the floorboards. Claudia flinched. Her elbow jerked backward, striking Harper's wrist. The heavy crystal wine bottle tipped. A solid splash of dark red liquid hit the pristine white linen tablecloth, splattered across Claudia's silk sleeve, and dripped onto the $200,000 Persian rug below. The dining room went dead silent. Arthur stopped breathing. The men in suits by the doors reached into their jackets. Claudia looked at her sleeve. Slowly, she turned her head to look at Harper. The expression on her face wasn't anger. It was something far worse. It was the thrill of having a sanctioned target. "You clumsy, stupid bitch," Claudia whispered. Harper didn't apologize. Apologies in this house were blood in the water. She immediately set the bottle down, grabbed a linen napkin from her tray, and moved to dab the silk sleeve. Claudia slapped her hand away. The crack echoed loudly against the glass walls. Harper's cheek burned where Claudia's rings caught her skin, but she didn't stumble back. She held her ground. "Get on your knees," Claudia commanded. Harper stared at her. "Get on your knees and clean the rug, now, or you won't walk out of this house tonight." Harper looked at the red stain sinking into the intricate threads of the rug. She looked at Claudia's manicured hand, trembling slightly with adrenaline. Then, for the first time all night, Harper looked at the head of the table. Damien Costa was watching her. He wasn't looking at Claudia. He wasn't looking at the terrified Arthur. He was staring dead at Harper. His expression was flat, but there was a sharp, calculating focus in his eyes. He was watching the machinery of her brain work. He was waiting to see if she would break. Harper slowly lowered herself to the floor. The marble was freezing against her kneecaps. She took a bottle of club soda from her cart, poured it onto a clean cloth, and began to press it into the rug. Press, don't rub. Rubbing sets the stain. She worked in complete silence, the entire table watching her scrub the floor. "She's useless," Claudia spat, turning back to Damien. "I want her gone tonight, and I want Arthur handled." Damien took a slow sip of his water. He set the glass down. The ice clinked loudly. "The girl didn't spill the wine, Claudia," Damien said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated in Harper's chest. Arthur slammed the table. Claudia bristled. "She lacked the reflexes to pull back. She's incompetent." "She's cleaning it," Damien replied smoothly. He didn't raise his voice, but the finality in his tone shut Claudia down instantly. He turned his gaze to the heavy-set man. "Arthur, you have until tomorrow morning to sign the lease over. If you slam a fist on my table again, you won't have a hand to sign with. Get out." Arthur stood up so fast his chair tipped over. He scrambled out of the room. Harper finished blotting the stain. She stood up, her uniform perfectly straight, her face a mask of calm indifference. She picked up the wine bottle, nodded once to the table, and walked back to the kitchen. She felt Damien's eyes burning into her spine the entire way. The bruise on Harper's cheekbone was a faded, ugly yellow by Monday morning. She covered it with cheap concealer, tied her hair back, and clocked in at 5 a.m. The dynamic in the house had shifted. It wasn't something spoken, it was atmospheric. The other maids gave Harper a wide berth, looking at her like she was a dead woman walking. She had survived a direct altercation with Claudia, and Damien Costa had publicly contradicted his fiancée over it. In the Mafia ecosystem, Harper had inadvertently painted a massive target on her own back. At 9:20 a.m. the summons came. "The master suite," Mrs. Gable said, her hands wringing her apron. Miss Claudia wants you to organize her dressing room. Harper took a slow breath. Understood. The master suite took up the entire east wing of the second floor. Claudia's dressing room was larger than the apartment Harper grew up in. It was a labyrinth of custom mahogany shelving, holding hundreds of pairs of designer shoes, rows of handbags locked behind glass, and racks of clothing arranged by season and color. Claudia was sitting on a velvet chaise lounge in the center of the room, sipping black coffee. She wore a silk robe, her legs crossed. "You're late," Claudia said without looking up from her tablet. "I came as soon as Mrs. Gable informed me. You should anticipate my needs, not wait for them." Claudia set the tablet down and finally looked at Harper. Her eyes flicked to the poorly concealed bruise on Harper's cheek. A tiny, cruel smile touched the corner of her mouth. "My shoes," Claudia said, gesturing to a wall displaying at least 200 pairs of stilettos, boots, and flats. "They are disorganized. The color gradient is off. I want them rearranged." Harper looked at the wall. They were perfectly organized, a flawless rainbow transitioning from stark white to midnight black. "How would you like them arranged, Miss Claudia?" "By heel height, from lowest to highest, then by color within that height, and then by designer." It was a task that would take 4 hours, minimum. It was entirely pointless. It was punishment. "Yes, Miss Claudia." Harper walked over to the first section and began pulling the shoes down. She worked methodically. She didn't sigh. She didn't roll her eyes. She treated the absurd task with the exact same mechanical efficiency she treated scrubbing the baseboards. She detached her ego from the labor. $17 an hour, she repeated in her head. $17 an hour. 2 hours passed. Harper was sitting on the floor, surrounded by a sea of Italian leather, sorting 3-inch heels by shade of nude. Her back ached. Her hands were dry. Claudia hadn't left the room. She was reading a magazine, occasionally glancing up to ensure Harper was still subjected to the humiliation. The heavy double doors of the master suite clicked open. Heavy measured footsteps crossed the thick bedroom carpet. Damien stepped into the doorway of the dressing room. He was already in a suit, adjusting his cuffs. He stopped, taking in the chaotic mess of shoes covering the floor, and Harper sitting in the middle of it. "What is this?" Damien asked. Claudia sat up straighter, the cruel edge instantly vanishing from her face, replaced by a polished, dutiful smile. "Damien, I'm just having the staff reorganize. The closet was becoming a disaster." Damien looked at the perfectly bare shelves, then at the mountain of shoes. He looked at Harper. Harper didn't stop working. She picked up a Louboutin pump, inspected the heel, and placed it next to a Jimmy Choo. She didn't look at him. She refused to play the victim. "We leave for the airstrip in 40 minutes, Damien said, his eyes still fixed on Harper's hands. "You aren't dressed." "I have plenty of time," Claudia purred, standing up and walking toward him, tying her robe tighter. "The girl will clean this up." As Claudia passed Harper, the heel of her slipper caught the edge of a meticulously sorted row of black boots. She kicked them, hard, scattering them across the floor and knocking over a stack of suede flats. "Clumsy," Claudia muttered, a clear, intentional dig at Harper. Harper closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. She breathed in the smell of leather and cedarwood. She opened her eyes, picked up the overturned boot, and put it back. Damien watched the entire exchange. His jaw tightened. It wasn't that he cared about a maid's feelings. Damien Costa was a ruthless man who dismantled lives for a living. but he despised inefficiency. And he despised petty emotional displays of power. True power didn't need to knock over a pile of shoes to prove it existed. Claudia's behavior wasn't just cruel, it was weak. "Leave it," Damien said. The words cut through the room like a gunshot. Claudia stopped halfway to the bathroom. Harper froze, holding a suede flat. "Excuse me?" Claudia said, her smile faltering. "Leave the shoes," Damien repeated, looking directly at Harper. "Get up." Harper slowly stood, wiping her dusty hands on her apron. "Damien, the closet is a mess. She needs to pack my overnight bag," Damien interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, carrying that lethal gravity that brooked no argument. "Thomas is busy with the cars. You will finish getting dressed, Claudia. Now." Claudia's face flushed a deep, ugly red. She looked from Damien to Harper, the hatred in her eyes so potent it practically hummed. But she couldn't disobey him, not when he used that tone. She turned and marched into the bathroom, slamming the door. Damien stood in the doorway for a moment longer. He looked at the bruise on Harper's cheek. He looked at her posture, spine straight, chin level, utterly devoid of the trembling fear that usually accompanied anyone in his presence. "My bag is in the adjoining room," Damien said quietly. "Pack 3 shirts, 2 ties, dark colors." "Yes, sir," Harper said. She walked past him, keeping a respectful distance. As she crossed the threshold, Damien spoke again, so softly she almost didn't hear him. "Next time she kicks a boot at you, don't pick it up." Harper stopped. She turned slightly, meeting the Mafia boss's dark, calculating eyes. She didn't say thank you. She knew this wasn't kindness. It was a test of a different kind. "If I don't pick it up, sir," Harper said evenly, "I don't get paid." She walked into the bedroom, leaving Damien Costa staring after her, a faint, dangerous smirk playing on his lips. The estate was a different organism when Damien Costa was away. The oppressive, vibrating tension left with him, replaced by a stagnant, hollow silence. For 3 days, Harper scrubbed floors, polished silver, and organized pantries without incident. Claudia had stayed in the city, presumably spending money to soothe her bruised ego. Then Friday night arrived, bringing a storm off the coast and a sudden, violent return. Harper was in the industrial laundry room in the basement, pulling hot, heavy linens from the dryer. The rumble of the machines masked the sound of the approaching convoy until the heavy steel door at the top of the service stairs slammed open. "Get a kit! Get a fucking kit now!" The voice was rough, panicked, and entirely out of place in the sanitized Costa estate. Harper dropped the sheets. She took the stairs 2 at a time, emerging into the back corridor that led into the garage. The air smelled of wet asphalt, gasoline, and hot copper. 3 men were hauling a 4th through the doorway. It was Leo, one of Damien's regular drivers. His face was the color of wet ash. His white shirt was soaked through with dark, heavy arterial blood. It wasn't a neat Hollywood gunshot. It was messy, jagged, and catastrophic. Mrs. Gable stood in the hallway, clutching a stack of fresh towels to her chest, completely paralyzed. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The other 2 maids on duty had backed against the wall, weeping hysterically. Damien walked in right behind them. He stripped off his soaked suit jacket, throwing it onto the floor. His white shirt was smeared with blood. He looked lethal, his eyes scanning the chaos, calculating the rapid loss of life happening on his pristine hardwood floors. "Put him down!" Damien barked at his men. "He's losing too much pumping it against gravity. Put him flat." They dropped Leo onto the floor. The man let out a wet, rattling gasp. "Where is the doctor?" Damien demanded, looking at one of the guards. 10 minutes out, boss. Traffic on the bridge. He doesn't have 10 minutes. Damien knelt beside Leo, pressing his bare hands against the wound in the man's shoulder, but the blood welled up instantly, slipping through his fingers. Harper didn't think. Instinct, forged in the emergency rooms of underfunded city hospitals where she had sat for hours with her dying mother, simply took over. She walked over to Mrs. Gable, snatched the stack of clean towels from the older woman's frozen grip, and dropped to her knees beside Damien. "Your hands are slipping," Harper said. Her voice was completely flat. She wasn't asking a question. She was stating a physiological fact. Damien's head snapped up. His eyes were wild for a fraction of a second before the cold calculation returned. He looked at the maid kneeling next to him. "He needs a tourniquet, but it's too high on the shoulder," Harper said, analyzing the wound. The bullet had ripped through the collarbone area. "We have to pack it. Move." She didn't wait for his permission. She shoved one of the thick white towels directly into the open wound, ignoring Leo's muffled scream. "Press down," she commanded Damien. "Harder. Put your body weight into it." Damien didn't hesitate. He leaned forward, driving the heels of his hands into the towel over the wound. "Gable," Harper snapped, not looking up. "Go to the kitchen. Bring the meat scissors, a bottle of vodka, and the heavy plastic wrap. Now!" Mrs. Gable blinked, snapped out of her trance by the sheer authority in Harper's voice, and ran down the hall. Harper looked at the two terrified guards. "Elevate his legs. It keeps the blood in his core. Do it now, or you're going to watch him die." The guards scrambled to lift Leo's heavy boots, resting them on an overturned hallway chair. For the next 8 minutes, the hallway was a localized war zone. Harper worked with brutal efficiency. She used the scissors to cut away the rest of Leo's shirt, creating a clear line of sight. She layered towels, packing them tight, wrapping the heavy plastic around his shoulder and chest to create a makeshift pressure bandage that wouldn't slip. Her hands were soaked in red. Her cheap uniform was ruined. She didn't flinch, didn't shake, didn't offer empty words of comfort. She just worked the problem. Damien watched her hands. He watched the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of her chest. While his men panicked and his staff crumbled, this 26-year-old housekeeper was holding death at bay with kitchen supplies and pure, unadulterated grit. The heavy front doors finally banged open, and the estate doctor rushed in with 2 paramedics carrying a trauma bag. "I've got him. Step back," the doctor said, dropping to his knees. Harper immediately let go. She stood up, her knees cracking. She looked down at her hands, dripping with another man's blood. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving a hollow, aching fatigue in its wake. She turned and walked to the utility sink in the laundry room without saying a word. She turned on the cold water and shoved her hands under the stream, watching the red swirl down the stainless steel drain. She grabbed a block of harsh lye soap and began scrubbing. A shadow fell across the sink. Harper looked up into the small mirror mounted above the basin. Damien was standing behind her. His knuckles were bruised and his shirt was ruined, but he looked perfectly composed. He didn't speak immediately. He just watched her scrub the blood out from under her fingernails. "Where did you learn to do that?" Damien asked. The gravel in his voice was softer now, stripped of the immediate violence of the hallway. I worked in a slaughterhouse for a summer to pay for college textbooks, Harper lied smoothly. Damien stepped closer. The proximity forced Harper to stop scrubbing and turn around. He was too close. The smell of rain and ozone clung to his skin, mixed with the sharp scent of violence. My men take a bullet and they scream for their mothers, Damien said slowly. My staff sees blood and they faint. You took command of a severed artery without your pulse rising above a resting rate. My pulse was high, sir. You are lying. Damien tilted his head, studying her face. You aren't afraid of blood. You aren't afraid of Claudia. And you aren't afraid of me. Why is that, Harper? Harper looked directly into his eyes. Because fear is a luxury, Mr. Costa. It requires time and energy I don't have. I just needed to clean up the mess before it ruined the hardwood. Do you need anything else, or can I finish my shift? A slow, dangerous smile pulled at the corner of Damien's mouth. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the look of a predator discovering a new, complex puzzle. Finish your shift, Damien said. He turned and walked up the stairs, leaving Harper alone in the damp basement. Claudia returned the next morning. If she noticed the distinct smell of bleach lingering in the back hallway, she didn't comment on it. What she did notice was the subtle, undeniable shift in the house's gravity. When Damien walked through a room, his eyes no longer slid past the staff like they were ghosts. His gaze lingered on the girl with the tied-back hair and the cheap uniform. Claudia was a creature of intense vanity and paranoia. She possessed a survival instinct honed by years of manipulating dangerous men. She recognized a threat, even one holding a feather duster. By Tuesday, Claudia initiated the strike. Harper was polishing the long mahogany dining table when Mrs. Gable scurried into the room, looking visibly sick. "The main hall, now," Mrs. Gable said, her voice shaking. Harper set the polish down. She wiped her hands and walked toward the foyer. The entire day, staff was lined up against the glass wall. 6 maids, 2 chefs, and the groundskeeper. Claudia stood in the center of the room, her arms crossed over a tailored white suit. She looked triumphant. Damien stood a few feet away, leaning against the archway of his study. He held a crystal glass with a finger of amber liquor in it. His face was a closed vault. "Someone in this house is a thief," Claudia announced. Her voice echoed off the marble. "My emerald and diamond choker, an antique from my grandmother, is missing from my vanity." A collective, terrified gasp rippled through the staff. Theft in a Mafia household wasn't punished with a polite termination and a police report. It was punished with broken bones in soundproof basements. "I know it was here yesterday," Claudia continued, pacing slowly down the line of trembling servants. "Which means one of you decided you were entitled to my property." She stopped directly in front of Harper. "You," Claudia said. Harper didn't blink. "I haven't been on the second floor in 3 days, Miss Claudia." "Liar," Claudia hissed. "Mrs. Gable, have her locker searched right now." 2 of Damien's guards, heavy men in dark suits, stepped forward. One of them held Harper's cheap canvas tote bag, retrieved from the staff break room. He unzipped it and dumped the contents onto the pristine marble floor. A worn wallet, a packet of cheap pain relievers, a set of keys, a subway pass, and a heavy velvet jewelry box tumbled out. The box fell open on impact. The emerald choker spilled onto the floor, the diamonds catching the midday sun. Silence slammed into the room. One of the maids let out a quiet sob. Claudia looked at Damien, a vindictive smirk playing on her lips. I told you she was garbage, Damien. She acts tough, but she's just a common rat. Handle her. Damien didn't move. He took a slow sip of his drink. He looked at the necklace on the floor, then up at Harper. Harper looked at the jewelry. She felt the heavy, suffocating weight of the trap closing around her. It was perfectly executed, her word against the fiancé of a mob boss. She was already dead, but Harper refused to die quietly. She looked up, bypassing Claudia entirely, and locked eyes with Damien. May I speak, sir? Harper asked. Her voice was steady, cutting through the heavy silence like a scalpel. You don't get to speak, Claudia shrieked, her composure slipping. You stole from me. Let her speak, Damien said. The command was absolute. Claudia snapped her mouth shut, her chest heaving. Harper didn't look at the guards. She didn't look at the necklace. She stepped forward, pointing at her tote bag on the floor. I clock in at 5 in the morning, Harper said clearly. I take the E train. It is a 90-minute commute. I walk the last mile from the gate to the staff entrance. It was raining this morning. She pointed to the canvas bag. My bag is soaked at the bottom. My wallet is damp. The pain relievers are waterlogged. She walked closer to the velvet box lying on the floor. That box is dry, Harper stated, looking at Damien. The velvet is pristine. If it had been in my bag during my commute, it would be ruined. Furthermore, the clasp on my locker has been broken since I started working here. I reported it to Mrs. Gable 2 weeks ago. Anyone could have opened it. Claudia's face contorted. She wrapped it in plastic. She protected it. She's making up excuses. I didn't see any plastic fall out of the bag, Damien interrupted quietly. He finally pushed off the wall and walked toward the center of the room. He bypassed Claudia and stopped in front of the jewelry box. He knelt down, picking it up. He examined the dry velvet. He looked at the clasp of the necklace. This is an intricate piece, Damien said, standing back up. He turned to Claudia. When did you last wear it? Saturday night, Claudia lied seamlessly. At the gala. You wore pearls on Saturday, Damien corrected, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. I bought them for you. Claudia swallowed hard. I meant Friday. I wore it Friday. You haven't worn this choker in 6 months, Claudia. Damien stepped toward her. The temperature in the room plummeted. The guards visibly stiffened. It is kept in the wall safe behind your vanity. A safe that requires a 6-digit biometric PIN and a retinal scan. Are you telling me this housekeeper bypassed a military-grade security system to steal a necklace you haven't looked at since winter? Claudia backed up a step, her heel catching on the marble grout. She must have seen me open it. She must have memorized the code. And the retinal scan? Damien asked softly. Did she borrow your eye? Claudia opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The blood drained from her face. She realized, too late, that her petty vengeance had insulted Damien's intelligence. Damien looked away from her in disgust. He tossed the velvet box onto the small entry table. The staff is dismissed, Damien said. No one moved for a second. Then, a collective exhale swept through the room, and the staff scattered like roaches in the light. Harper bent down, gathered her damp belongings, and shoved them back into her tote bag. She stood up, slung the bag over her shoulder, and looked at Claudia. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just offered a look of profound, exhausting pity. My shift ends at 4, Harper said to Damien, turning her back on both of them and walking down the hallway. Midnight. The house was finally asleep. Harper sat on the floor of the massive library, surrounded by stacks of first edition books. Her job was to dust the top shelves, a task that required a stepladder and infinite patience. She was tired, the kind of tired that sank into the marrow of your bones and permanently altered your posture. The heavy oak doors of the library clicked shut. Harper didn't jump. She just lowered her dust cloth and looked over her shoulder. Damien stood in the shadows near the door. He had shed his jacket and tie. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, revealing dark, intricate tattoos sprawling across his forearms. He looked less like a corporate CEO and more like the street soldier he used to be. He walked over to the rolling bar cart in the corner, poured 2 fingers of scotch into a glass, and walked toward her. He didn't offer her the drink. He sat down in a heavy leather wingback chair a few feet away from her stepladder, watching her. "You should have let her fire you," Damien said into the quiet room. "I need the money," Harper replied, turning back to the shelf and wiping down a leather-bound copy of the Odyssey. "I pay my staff well above market rate, but it's not enough to justify putting up with a frame job." Damien took a sip of his scotch. "Why are you here, Harper?" "I clean things, Mr. Costa." "Stop the bullshit." His voice was low, carrying a warning. "You have the situational awareness of a combat veteran. You deconstruct a lie faster than my lawyers, and you don't break. People who need a housekeeping job break. Why do you need $70,000? Harper's hand stopped moving. She stared at the gold lettering on the spine of the book. He had looked into her. Of course he had. He was a paranoid mob boss. He probably knew her blood type by now. She turned around, sitting on the top step of the ladder, looking down at him. "My mother had pancreatic cancer," Harper said, her voice devoid of emotion. It was a recitation of facts. "She didn't have insurance. The hospital kept her alive for 18 months. They charged us for every pill, every IV bag, every hour she spent choking on her own fluids. When she died, they handed me the bill. If I don't pay it, they put a lien on the house she left me. It's a garbage house in a bad neighborhood, but it's mine." Damien stared at her. The ambient light from the street lamps outside caught the sharp angles of his face. "I can write a check right now and make the debt vanish," Damien said. It wasn't an offer born of charity. It was a test. "I know you can." "Then ask." "No." Damien tilted his head. "Pride is a stupid reason to suffer." "It isn't pride," Harper corrected him, her eyes narrowing. "It's math. If you write that check, I owe you, and I know exactly what happens to people who owe Damien Costa. I would rather owe a faceless hospital conglomerate than a man who can order someone's kneecap shattered before breakfast." Damien didn't get angry. He didn't yell. Instead, a low, dark chuckle rumbled in his chest. It was a genuine sound of amusement, rare and startling in the quiet room. "You are incredibly cynical," Damien noted. "I'm awake," Harper fired back. "I live in the real world. You live in a glass house where people lie to you because you pay them or terrify them. I don't want your money, and I don't want your protection." Damien set his glass down on a side table. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, closing the distance between them. The predator was fully engaged now. "Claudia is going to keep trying to destroy you," he said softly. "I know. She is relentless, and she is cruel. And eventually, she will find a way to hurt you that you can't logic your way out of." "Then I'll handle it," Harper said, gripping the edge of the ladder. Damien stood up. He walked to the base of the ladder, looking up at her. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating off his body. He reached out, his large, calloused hand wrapping around the wooden rung right next to her knee. "I don't think you will," Damien said, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that finally made her heart hammer against her ribs. "I think you're going to realize that in this house, you only survive if you belong to me." He didn't wait for her to answer. He turned and walked out of the library, the heavy doors closing softly behind him, leaving Harper alone in the dark with a sudden, terrifying realization. She wasn't just fighting Claudia anymore. She was fighting a war on two fronts, and she was rapidly losing ground. The transition wasn't subtle. The entire estate felt the tectonic plates of power shifting beneath the Italian marble floors. Damien stopped taking his meals in the formal dining room with Claudia. He ate in his study, and he specifically requested Harper to bring the trays. They rarely spoke during these brief interactions. He would review shipping manifests or offshore account ledgers, and she would set down his black coffee and heavily seared steak. But the silence between them had changed. It was no longer the oppressive quiet of an employer and a servant. It was the heavy, charged silence of two people meticulously observing each other across a chessboard. Claudia felt it. She was a woman whose entire existence was predicated on her proximity to power. Damien was her anchor to the underworld, her shield, and her loaded weapon. Without his absolute backing, she was just another wealthy socialite with too many enemies, and she was losing him to a girl who made $17 an hour and smelled of industrial bleach. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Claudia's desperation finally mutated into violence. The house was relatively empty. Damien was in the city handling a union dispute at the docks, taking the majority of his security detail with him. Mrs. Gable had sent Harper down to the subterranean wine cellar to conduct a full inventory of the Bordeaux reserves. The cellar was a fortress within a fortress. It was a massive climate-controlled vault built deep into the bedrock beneath the estate, accessible only by a heavy steel door equipped with a digital keypad. Inside, thousands of bottles rested in custom mahogany racks bathed in dim amber light. The temperature was strictly maintained at 55 degrees, chilly but tolerable for an hour of work. Harper was 40 minutes into the inventory, her clipboard resting against a rack of vintage reds, when she heard the heavy metallic thud. She turned around. The heavy steel door at the top of the short stone staircase was shut. Harper walked up the steps and pushed against the handle. It didn't budge. She wasn't immediately concerned. The door was heavy, and it sometimes caught on the latch. She knocked hard against the thick metal. "Hello?" Harper called out. "Mrs. Gable?" The door stuck again. Silence. Then she heard the distinct electronic beep of the keypad on the other side, followed by another beep and another. Someone was overriding the system. A sudden, aggressive hum vibrated through the walls. The massive industrial cooling units, designed to keep the room at a stable, cool temperature, suddenly kicked into overdrive. A blast of frigid air hit Harper from the overhead vents. She stepped back, looking up at the digital thermostat mounted near the door. The red numbers were dropping rapidly. 50, 45, 40. Through the thick, reinforced glass observation panel embedded in the center of the door, a face appeared. It was Claudia. She wasn't smiling. Her face was a mask of cold, absolute hatred. She looked at Harper, trapped on the other side of the glass, with the detached curiosity of someone watching a spider drown in a sink. Harper slammed her fist against the glass. "Open the door, Claudia!" Claudia didn't flinch. She simply mouthed a single word through the soundproof barrier. "Goodbye." Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the basement corridor. Harper was alone. The temperature hit 35 degrees. Panic is a biological response. It floods the brain with adrenaline, speeds up the heart rate, and forces rapid breathing. Harper felt the familiar, cold claws of terror gripping her chest, but she ruthlessly shoved it down. Panic meant sweating. Sweating meant freezing faster. She assessed her environment. The cellar was essentially a concrete box. No windows, no secondary exits. The walls were solid stone. The door was industrial steel. She looked at the thermostat. 30 degrees. The air was becoming physically painful to breathe, each inhale burning her lungs. She was wearing her standard uniform, a thin cotton dress, a white apron, and thin rubber-soled shoes. She had no jacket. "Think," Harper commanded herself. "Work the problem." She walked down the stairs, wrapping her arms around her torso to conserve body heat. She needed a tool. She needed something to break the glass panel in the door. It was reinforced, but it wasn't solid steel. It had a breaking point. Everything did. She scanned the racks, wine bottles, thousands of them. Glass against reinforced glass wouldn't work. The bottles would shatter, slicing her hands to ribbons. She needed weight, density. Her eyes landed on a decorative display in the center of the room. A massive 3-liter Jeroboam bottle of champagne, easily weighing 10 pounds, resting on a heavy wrought iron stand. She grabbed the bottle by the neck. It was freezing to the touch, the heavy glass draining the warmth from her bare hands instantly. The temperature dropped to 25 degrees. Harper's teeth began to chatter violently. Her fingers were growing numb, the joints stiffening. She carried the massive bottle up the stairs. The cold was a physical weight now, pressing down on her shoulders, making her movements sluggish and uncoordinated. She stood in front of the door. She planted her feet. She hoisted the heavy bottle over her shoulder like a baseball bat. She swung it as hard as she could against the center of the glass panel. The impact sent a jarring, agonizing shockwave up her arms. The heavy bottle didn't break, but it bounced off the glass with a dull thud. The reinforced panel didn't even scratch. Harper stumbled back, dropping to one knee. Her breath plumed in the freezing air in thick, white clouds. The cold was seeping into her core. She could feel her blood slowing down, retreating from her extremities to protect her vital organs. 20 degrees. She looked at the glass panel again. It was designed to withstand blunt force. It was designed to keep thieves out. "Okay," Harper whispered, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "Not the glass." She looked down at the lock mechanism, a heavy steel deadbolt housed in the door frame. If she couldn't break the window, she had to compromise the lock. But she had no tools, no drill, no crowbar. Her vision began to blur at the edges. Hypothermia was setting in. The violent shivering was starting to subside, replaced by a dangerous, heavy lethargy. The floor looked comfortable. If she just closed her eyes for a minute, the cold wouldn't hurt so much. No. She bit her tongue hard. The sharp copper taste of blood flooded her mouth, the pain snapping her brain back into focus. She crawled toward the iron stand that had held the champagne bottle. It was a solid piece of wrought iron, standing 3 feet tall, ending in a decorative, pointed fleur-de-lis. Harper grabbed the heavy stand. She dragged it up the stairs. It felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Her muscles screamed in protest, starved of oxygen and warmth. She positioned the sharp, pointed end of the iron stand directly against the seam of the door, right where the deadbolt slid into the frame. She needed a hammer. She picked up the 10-pound champagne bottle. With the last reserve of her strength, Harper swung the heavy glass bottle, using it as a mallet, driving it directly into the flat base of the iron stand. Clang! The iron point bit into the steel seam. Sparks flew. She swung again. Clang! The metal groaned. The gap between the door and the frame widened by a millimeter. Harper kept swinging. She couldn't feel her hands anymore. She was operating on pure, mechanical repetition. She didn't think about her debt. She didn't think about her dead mother. She didn't think about Damien Costa. She only thought about the next swing. 10 degrees. The glass bottle shattered on the 15th strike, exploding into a shower of sharp fragments and freezing liquid. The champagne soaked Harper's dress, the alcohol instantly chilling her skin to the bone. She dropped the broken neck of the bottle. She slumped against the heavy steel door, her energy completely spent. The iron stand was wedged deep into the door frame, but the deadbolt held. She slid down the rough metal until she was sitting on the freezing stone step. The silence of the cellar rushed back in, heavy and absolute. Harper pulled her knees to her chest. She closed her eyes. It was quiet here. No hospital monitors beeping. No collection agencies calling. No Mafia princesses throwing shoes at her head. Just the quiet, creeping dark. For the first time in 10 years, Harper stopped fighting. She let the cold take her. Damien Costa returned at 6 o'clock. He handed his cashmere coat to the butler, rolling his shoulders to work out the stiff knot between his shoulder blades. The house hummed with the sterile, anxious efficiency he paid for. Dinner prepped, floors shined, guards rotating shifts. "Where is she?" Damien asked. The butler paused. "Miss Claudia is dressing for dinner, sir." "Harper," Damien corrected. His voice was flat. "I haven't seen her, sir. Check with Mrs. Gable." Damien found the head housekeeper in the kitchen, tapping a stylus against a tablet. The room smelled of roasting garlic and rosemary. 2 chefs chopped vegetables with rhythmic precision. "Where is Harper?" Damien asked. Mrs. Gable flinched, dropping the stylus. "Mr. Costa, she is conducting the Bordeaux inventory in the main cellar. She went down around 2 o'clock. Damien checked his watch. It was past 6. "She's been counting bottles for 4 hours? It's an extensive collection, sir, and she is very—" Damien didn't wait for the excuse. A cold, hard knot formed in his gut. Harper worked with brutal efficiency. She didn't dawdle. She didn't take 4 hours to count a room. He moved. His strides were long, eating up the hallway carpet, bypassing the grand staircase, and taking the basement stairs 2 at a time. The ambient temperature dropped as he hit the subterranean corridor. He stopped. The heavy steel door of the wine cellar was shut. A wrought iron display stand was jammed deep into the seam of the doorframe, anchoring the deadbolt. Above the door, the digital thermostat flashed a red warning. System override. Internal temp. 8 degrees. Damien's chest tightened. A literal, physical restriction of air. He grabbed the heavy iron stand and ripped it backward. Metal shrieked against metal as he threw it onto the concrete floor. He punched his master code into the keypad. The deadbolt disengaged with a heavy thud. He hauled the door open. Frigid, alcohol-soaked air hit him like a physical blow. He found her on the top step. Harper was curled into a microscopic ball, her knees tucked against her chest. Her uniform was stiff, coated in a thin layer of white frost. The scent of frozen champagne clung to her skin. Her lips were a terrifying bloodless blue. "Harper!" Damien dropped to his knees. He grabbed her shoulders. She was rigid, cold as a marble statue. He pressed 2 fingers against her throat, digging into the icy flesh to find the carotid artery. Nothing. He pressed harder. His own pulse roared in his ears. There, a faint, agonizingly slow flutter. 1 beat, 3 seconds, another beat. "Thomas!" Damien roared. The sound violently shattered the dead silence of the basement. "Medic, now!" He didn't wait for footsteps. Damien shoved his arms under Harper and stood up. She weighed nothing. She felt fragile, her joints locked in a defensive curl against the freezing air. He sprinted up the stairs, kicking the corridor doors open with his heavy boots. "Blankets to my study," Damien barked at a terrified maid in the hallway. "Move!" He kicked his study door shut behind him and laid Harper on the heavy leather sofa. He grabbed the remote, switching the massive gas fireplace to its maximum output. Flames roared, casting jagged shadows across the room. Her clothes were acting as a refrigerator. Damien stripped off his suit jacket. He tore the stiff, frozen apron from her body and unzipped the cheap cotton dress, pulling the icy fabric away. He grabbed the heavy wool throw from his chair and wrapped it tightly around her shivering frame. He sat on the edge of the sofa, pulling her into his lap, pressing her against his chest to force his own body heat into her freezing skin. The medic burst into the room, Thomas right behind him. "Severe hypothermia," Damien stated. His voice was completely devoid of panic, a terrifying contrast to the violence in his eyes. "Core temp is critical." The medic scrambled to pull a bag of warmed saline from his trauma kit. He swore under his breath, struggling to find a vein in Harper's pale, contracted arm before finally securing the needle. He draped silver thermal blankets over the wool. "We have to raise it slowly, sir," the medic warned, hooking her up to a portable monitor. "Too fast and her heart will stop." Damien didn't look up. He watched the frost melt off her eyelashes. "Thomas," Damien said. "Boss. Security footage, basement corridor, 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock. Thomas returned 10 minutes later. He handed Damien a tablet in silence. Damien watched the screen. He saw Harper walk in. He saw the door shut. And then he watched Claudia step into the frame. He watched his fiancée punch the override code into the keypad. He watched her stare through the reinforced glass, her face a mask of absolute apathy, before she turned and walked away. Damien placed the tablet face down on the desk. The fury that washed over him wasn't explosive. It was absolute zero. He shifted Harper off his lap gently, laying her flat on the sofa and tucking the thermal blankets tight around her neck. He stood, adjusting his cuffs, ignoring the smears of her blood on his white shirt. "Lock down the perimeter," Damien ordered Thomas. Assemble the staff in the foyer. Damien walked upstairs. Claudia was sitting at her vanity, applying red lipstick, wrapped in a black evening gown. She caught his eye in the mirror and smiled. "Darling, you're back." Damien crossed the room, grabbed the back of her upholstered chair, and yanked it backward. Claudia hit the floor with a shriek. He didn't give her time to process. He grabbed a handful of the expensive silk gown, hauled her to her feet, and dragged her out the door. He dragged her down the grand staircase and threw her onto the marble floor of the foyer. 12 armed guards stood at attention. The entire staff huddled in the corner. Claudia scrambled backward, her perfect hair ruined. "Damien, what are you doing?" "You locked an employee in a freezer," Damien's voice carried through the cavernous space. It was a death sentence delivered at room volume. "You manipulated the climate controls and watched her freeze. You attempted murder under my roof." Claudia went pale. "She's a thief. She disrespected us." "Shut your mouth." Claudia flinched. "Take the ring off," Damien commanded. "Damien, please, my father—" "Your father relies on my supply lines," Damien interrupted. "If he speaks a word of this, I dismantle his territory by morning. Take it off." Sobbing violently, Claudia slid the 3-carat diamond off her finger and placed it on the floor. "Thomas, escort her to the gate," Damien said, turning his back on her. "She is no longer affiliated with me. If anyone in my syndicate does business with her, they answer to me." Claudia screamed as Thomas hauled her away. Damien didn't watch. He walked back to his study, closing the door on the noise, returning to the fire and the slow, steady beep of the heart monitor. It took 3 days for Harper to fully thaw. She spent them in the guest suite on the first floor. It was a room usually reserved for visiting cartel bosses, equipped with a king-sized bed, blackout curtains, and a private nurse on 24-hour standby. When she finally opened her eyes on Friday morning, the first thing she noticed was the absence of cold. The room was aggressively warm. The second thing she noticed was Damien Costa sitting in a heavy armchair near the window, a laptop balanced on his knees. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a simple black t-shirt and dark jeans. He looked tired. Harper tried to sit up. Her muscles screamed in protest, weak and aching. She managed to prop herself up against the pillows, pulling the heavy down comforter up to her chin. Damien closed the laptop and set it aside. He walked over to the bed and poured a glass of water from a pitcher on the nightstand, handing it to her. "Drink," he commanded softly. Harper took the glass. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she managed to take a few sips. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "Where is she?" Harper asked. Her voice was barely a rasp. "Gone," Damien said, sitting on the edge of the mattress. "She has been stripped of her title, her protection, and her access to my assets. She is back in the city, currently trying to pawn her designer bags to afford a lawyer. She will never step foot on this property again." Harper processed the information. She didn't feel triumphant. She just felt exhausted. "You blew up your engagement," Harper said slowly. "You humiliated the daughter of a captain in your syndicate. That's going to cause political fallout." Damien let out a short, rough laugh. "I run the syndicate. The captains fall in line, or they get replaced. The politics are irrelevant. She tried to murder something that belongs to me." Harper stiffened. She lowered the water glass, her eyes narrowing. "I don't belong to you," Harper said flatly. The cold in her voice rivaled the temperature of the cellar. "I am an employee. I clean your house." Damien didn't argue. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of heavy stock paper. He placed it on the bedside table. "That is a cashier's check for $70,000, made out to the hospital conglomerate," Damien said. "Your mother's debt is paid in full. The lien on your house is lifted." Harper stared at the paper. The physical manifestation of the crushing weight that had defined her entire adult life, sitting casually next to a water pitcher. "I told you I didn't want your money," she said, her voice shaking with sudden, suppressed anger. "I told you I wouldn't owe you." "You don't owe me," Damien replied smoothly. "Consider it hazard pay, a settlement for workplace injury. It requires nothing from you in return." Harper looked at him. She looked at the hardened, ruthless Mafia boss sitting on the edge of her bed. He wasn't playing a game anymore. The predatory smirk was gone, replaced by a dark, intense sincerity that was far more dangerous. "Then what do you want?" Harper asked. Damien leaned forward. He reached out, gently brushing a stray lock of hair away from her bruised cheek. His touch was incredibly light, a stark contrast to the violence he was capable of inflicting. "I want you to stay," Damien said. "As a maid?" "No." Damien's eyes held hers, stripping away the pretense, the hierarchy, and the bullshit. "I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who are terrified of me, people who lie to me, and people who want to use me. You look at me and you just see a man. You don't flinch. You don't submit. You took a bullet wound in a freezing vault and you didn't break. I don't want a maid, Harper. I want an equal." Harper stared at him. It was a terrifying proposition. He was offering her a throne in an empire built on blood and shadows. He was offering her a life where she would never be cold, never be poor, and never be helpless again. But it meant standing beside the devil. "I won't be a quiet trophy on your arm," Harper warned him, her chin lifting defiantly. "I won't turn a blind eye to the things you do. And if you ever try to control me the way you controlled her, I will walk out the front gate and you will never find me." Damien smiled. It wasn't a cold smirk. It was a genuine smile that reached his eyes, a look of profound, terrifying respect. "I'm counting on it," Damien said softly. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was heavy, claiming, and possessive. And for the first time in her life, Harper didn't fight back. She reached up, gripping the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, anchoring herself to the storm. The Costa estate learned a new rule quickly. You could look at the boss, but you answered to Harper. The maid who walked into a Mafia stronghold and dismantled the queen without firing a single shot proved that real power isn't loud. It's just unbreakable. If you loved this deep dive into the dark, cynical, and grounded romance of Damien and Harper, hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who loves a fiercely independent heroine, and don't forget to subscribe for more intense, original stories. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in the wine cellar?